Welcome to the second annual Friendsgiving Spectacular. My name is Kenny Ryan. I'm the host of Abridged Presidential Histories, and I'm joined today by my good friends Jerry Landry, host of the Presidencies of the United States podcast.
Hello, how's everyone doing today?
Doing great, Jerry. We got Alicia with us, host of Civics and Coffee podcast.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy. And we've also got Howard Dory of Plotting Through the Presidents.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. I'm going to give everyone a chance to tell us a little bit more about their podcast in a bit. But first, I want to introduce the format for the show. What are we doing today? Each of us prepared one question for each other participant. So we'll be playing a little bit of hot potato. Whoever receives a question will ask the next question. And you know, friends, now that we're doing this twice, I think it's become a tradition. So I'm excited about this new Friendsgiving tradition we have.
It's better than the canned cranberry sauce that always comes every year. That's a tradition that we can let go of. This is one that we can bring on.
I was going to say, those are some fighting words, Jerry. So there are people that crave that cranberry sauce in a can.
Yep.
So
Need it once a year.
Howard, would you mind telling us a bit more about your show?
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife Jess and I co-host the podcast Plotting Through the Presidents, and we really dive into lesser-known stories, usually of the early United States, having some kind of relationship with the presidents or the founders and their families. Jess doesn't know the stories ahead of time, and I just bring her these stories that I've deeply fallen into a rabbit hole and researched and related to her, and we have a lot of fun just kind of going through them.
His is really fun. The reactions by your wife are just fantastic and often very relatable. Alicia, would you mind telling us a bit about your show?
sure. Civics and Coffee is history of the time it takes you to drink a cup of coffee. So I take a person, place, event, subject, and I break it down as quickly as I possibly can, trying to highlight the main points, much like Abridged Presidential Histories. And I take listener requests. It started off as a COVID project, but it has definitely expanded beyond that and has been so much fun, and it led me to new experiences like meeting you three. So I'm here for it.
Thank you. And yeah, Alicia's podcast, great show, usually like 15-minute episodes or so, and always really fun and compelling stuff. You do a great job with your presentation. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
And Jerry, would you mind telling us about Presidencies of the United States?
So Presidencies kind of takes the other approach. Instead of succinct and abridged, it's the deep dive, everything that you never knew you wanted to know about presidential history. But I started with the premise of going beyond just the individual who's serving as chief executive, because there are so many other people, so many other events that are lesser known, but that contributed to either the success or failure of a presidency. And so in Presidencies, we explore all of that. We're going through each presidency one by one, but also I've done a couple of special series spin-offs looking at the lives of the cabinet members in the Seat at the Table series. And we're starting a series on the vice presidencies of the United States. Even though everybody assumes that they were doing nothing, they really were doing a few things at least.
I look forward to vice presidencies of the United States. Will that also be like 50 episodes on each vice president, Jerry?
Just one, maybe two. I'm having to break up Aaron Burr into two because it's Aaron Burr.
Oh, he's crazy. Yeah. Cool. As for my show, Abridged Presidential Histories covers the successes, setbacks, and scandals of the presidents in order in 60 minutes or less. I also will feature historian interviews for deeper dives on some of the biggest topics. If you enjoy any one of our podcasts, you'll probably enjoy the others, so we encourage you to check them all out. So let's dive into the questions. Jerry, I'm going to start with one for you. Nobody dives deep into presidential history like Jerry Landry. In the past 6 years, I looked this up, you have produced more than 200 episodes on Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison. You are questionably, arguably one president shy of having covered the entire founding generation. You know, it kind of depends, do you consider Monroe and John Quincy part of that or not? What do you think is the biggest mistake the founding generation made, aside from not abolishing slavery?
Yeah, that's definitely the obvious one. But They did make some other mistakes. And again, that's one of the things that I love about presidencies and being able to do this deep dive is really getting into what was going on, taking them off of that pedestal and looking at these individuals as people who are flawed, who make mistakes. And to me, one of the biggest mistakes that they made was engaging in dirty politics. You know, we think of the founding generation and the early republic as being this time of all these people just respectfully disagreeing. And it was not the case. They had journalists who were scandal mongers. And, you know, even though James Callender is the one that usually pops into people's minds, it was happening not just on the Democratic Republican side, but also on the Federalist side. They were spreading rumors and innuendos and, oh, well, if Jefferson becomes president, you're going to have to hide your Bible because he's going to take them all away from everybody. You have rumors about James Madison pimping out his wife and sister-in-law to foreign dignitaries. You have all these things going on, and it was dirty politics. And the leaders who we put on those pedestals, like Jefferson, like Madison, they not only knew this was going on, they helped to establish it. Jefferson, as Secretary of State, puts Philip Freneau on the payroll at the State Department so that he can found an opposition paper opposing the administration that he's in.
Right.
You know, this is something that is not anything new. This dirty politics and this back and forth and spreading, you know, fake news. It's nothing new. It was happening in the early republic. And even though at any time anybody can say, you know what, we're gonna back away from that. We're gonna say this is wrong. Let's do something else. I think having that precedent set so early on and by figures that we look to in our national mythos as kind of the people that we're supposed to be following, the people that we're supposed to be emulating, it makes it that much harder to break away from that and do something different, like some people at that time wanted to, and some people said that they were, but they really weren't.
Right.
That's a really good answer. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, I try. So I've got the next question, and this is for Alicia. So, Alicia, we've discussed this topic before, but for the sake of our listeners, would you mind sharing some of the challenges you faced as a podcaster and historian dedicated to sharing information on the lives and legacies of the First Ladies, but hitting that period in American history in the pre-Civil War era where there's so little primary sources from which to draw upon about these individuals? And kind of as a second part to that, what advice would you give to students of history, including, of course, this humble podcaster, because I do try and do a focus on each First Lady as well. You know, what advice would you give to us who would like to learn as much as possible about these women who possibly played a larger role in history than the records might lead us to believe?
Yeah, I think to your first point, even unpopular, quote unquote, unpopular presidents, right? Like Franklin Pierce is probably not a guy that is going to be selling books, by and large. But there have been books written about him. There's been investigations into his life, his administration, his legacy, so on and so forth. And that's not always the case with first ladies. And part of that obviously is because even if you were a bad president, you were still president. So you still left records everywhere, right? And almost all of them had a legislative career or a military career. So there was this natural saving of letters and memoranda and so on and so forth. So I think for historians, there's just a lot more with which to look at and kind of build an argument. And that's not always the case with women, the wives of these presidents. And so for me, it's been kind of a bummer because as I've grown in my program, I'm becoming more and more aware that I slant towards women's history and really love women's history, and always wanted to make sure that the first ladies got their due. So hitting those specific women where there's just not a lot written has been a little frustrating. I would say Alita Black has written a pretty decent introduction to the women behind the great men of history, and she's also a fabulous historian. I got to meet her over the summer, which was
That's awesome.
kind of yeah, it's kind of like the Oscars. I was like, oh my God, it's Alita Black. But she's written a really good treatment about kind of, just basic introductions into the first ladies. I think I'm very lucky in the fact that right now I'm in school, so I have access to a university library and all of the academic journals. And so I would recommend even Google Scholar. If sometimes you get really lucky and you get an academic article or two, and that's probably going to be about as close as most of us people who don't have access to the archives and so on and so forth. That's probably going to be your best bet. And then don't be afraid of looking at unconventional methods, right? So a lot of the episodes that I built lately have come from people who have written letters about these women. So again, it's not necessarily their diaries because they got into a habit of burning letters and burning diaries, or maybe they didn't feel confident enough in their literacy, and so they made sure that nobody else saw their papers. But, there have been other people who have written about them. And so you can kind of tease together at least the perceptions of who they were. And some of these women and some of these families, they have house museums. Now, obviously, house museums are going to be slanted in a positive light to the former owner. But again, you get a sense of who they were, what was important to them, what did they prioritize, at least in a domestic sense, to give you a kind of a fuller picture of who that person was. And so you have to get creative, unfortunately. And then sometimes you just, you have to realize you only have access to your local library. Maybe you're lucky and you live in a college town and you can go to the university library, but, not a lot of first ladies have robust archives. So you got to make do with what you got.
Thank you.
And so my question is for Howard. You have had some pretty exciting developments with your show this year. And so given your show's setup, it's pretty primed, in my humble opinion, for a special live audience recording. So would you ever consider doing a live show? And also, more importantly, where do I get the tickets?
You're so kind, first of all. Thank you so much. But yeah, it's been a really exciting year. We just joined the Airwave Media Podcast Network. We're planning to relaunch around President's Day 2024. President's Day, election year, no pressure, But it's really exciting. As far as a live show, I have a background in improv. Back in college, I did weekly shows for 4 years, a few sketch shows too. Jess did even more theater in junior high and high school than I did. So bottom line, we're both hams, for sure. I'm pretty comfortable now behind a microphone where I have the power of editing and writing ahead of time, and then editing not just for streamlined sort of flow, but also sometimes I'm like, oh, I said the wrong thing. I get to change that. A live audience, not so much. But still, absolutely. The answer is yes. I'd absolutely be down to do some kind of live shows with me and Jess. The first thing I think is, oh man, we'd have to find a babysitter. But I think we could probably.
Why can't you bring the kid?
Sometimes we cover things about presidential history that aren't appropriate for kids. Yeah, and the way that some presidents talked and we talk certainly isn't sometimes. But yeah, I'd love to do that. I think that one of the first things you need is to have the demand before you actually do a live show, and I don't know how you get that. So I might suggest maybe you might want to write to your congressperson. I'm not sure if that's how that works, but yeah, I think that might be the best first route. One thing I just wanted to add to something you were saying, Alicia, studying women's history, something I found difficult as like a sort of digital detective is searching newspaper archives. When it comes to women, their names might be 4 different ways. You've got their first name, last name. You've got Mrs. this. You've got Mrs. husband's first name, last name. If their husband's first name is William, you've got WM period. There's a million different permutations for finding references to women that can be really frustrating in the archives. And it's something that people probably just didn't think about back in the day, but just one of those things that you really have to think of different ways to even see how they were covered when they were. But yeah, really excited about when you do find something. It's like, yes, I found it. This variation of a spelling, and that's really exciting. I have a question for Kenny now.
Bring it on.
You've covered a lot of presidents. You've talked to a lot of experts. I think you probably have a good sense of how to answer this question. Let's say aliens are coming. Now, we'd like to think that they're more advanced and peaceful than we are, but let's say that they're just as dangerous and volatile. You can choose 3 presidents, living or dead, as ambassadors to meet with the alien leaders and to save us all. I would ask you, who do you pick and why? And I would open this question up to everyone after that, too, to see who they might say.
Ooh.
Yeah. The question of our time, this one.
It's relevant, We're almost there.
I think, okay, here's, I think, my 3 guys. I think first person, LBJ, because he is just the GOAT of one-on-one negotiations. And if anybody can convince the aliens to spare us all, it's him. What he can do in one-on-one scenarios is just amazing. I think my second guy would be Andrew Jackson. Because if we got to start shooting, he's been in what, 2 or 3 duels, a shootout in the West, military experience. Someone tried to assassinate him and he beat the guy into submission with a cane. So I think having him in the room is just like a good idea. And then I think my third guy would be JFK. Because maybe the aliens will spare us if we can just get them in bed with us. And we got to try everything here. So I think those are my 3.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And
what about Jerry, Alicia? Do y'all have any thoughts?
So,
Or even Howard, I'm curious if you had like someone in mind that you expected to make the list.
LBJ was definitely on my list because you need someone that can lean in and really intimidate the aliens into getting what you want.
Okay, but do we really want to mess with people that are probably got better weaponry and advanced life forms? Like
It's a mix because also on my
is
list
a
would
mix.
be John Quincy Adams.
Yeah,
So-
he's the first one I wrote down.
Oh, yeah, to do the diplomat thing, yeah, for sure, right?
Yeah, the
and
lifelong
then
diplomat.
Then I would think Lincoln to kind of tell them stories and schmooze them, and that kind of attitude. Because maybe the aliens have high pitched voices, and he did too. I think so. They might be on that same wavelength. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I went with the lifelong diplomat, John Quincy Adams, because I just feel like if anybody's going to convince them to maybe not shoot us and blow us into oblivion, it's going to be that guy and all of his multilingual skills. And then I went with, okay, who would demonstrate kind of the best of what we have to offer, just in terms of compassion and empathy and wanting to do good. So I went Jimmy Carter. I mean, I know his presidency wasn't great, but I just feel like you can't not just adore the man. And then I wanted to go with somebody who could make others feel like they're super important and that they had a lot of that they were successful more than they were. And so I went with FDR. So those would be my 3.
Nice. Anyone you'd add, Jerry?
I took a little different of a tact. So I was thinking of Theodore Roosevelt because, he speaks softly and carries a big stick. And I think he would just exhaust the aliens and they would just say, whatever, go ahead. You've got too much energy for us.
Yeah.
But then I was also thinking of Lincoln, a storyteller, somebody who could relate with other folks. And then worst case scenario, Lincoln could distract him with stories, and then Andrew Jackson comes in and just eradicates him. So either way, I think we're good.
Yeah. That's a great question, Howard.
Thanks. These were some great answers.
All right, Alicia, I got one for you next.
Yes, sir.
Now, I don't know about Jerry or Howard, but my qualifications for talking about history are a minor I earned in college. And you are blowing me away because you're earning an actual master's in history right now. How has that experience changed your view or appreciation for history?
Yeah, so this is a pretty heavy question, just in terms of what it's meant to me. I've always wanted to go back and do graduate school, and I think rightfully so. When I was graduating with my bachelor's degree, it wasn't the right time, as depressive as it was to get that feedback from a mentor of mine. I think I needed to go out into the world and experience life, and so that led to a lot of trepidation going back into graduate school. More than a decade since I had graduated, but it has been more fulfilling than I think I anticipated and or was prepared for. I find that I can't wait to get to class, and really even readings that I'm not necessarily sure I follow all of exactly what the historian is arguing. I still love their process and the fact that they found something and the whole craft of making an argument. So I've always been obviously a big fangirl of historians anyways, because they're amazing and I love them. But getting a chance to like really dive into some of their research has been, in a different fashion, has been very much a good journey for the heart. So definitely went into this with some humility, still have that humility, but just a deep appreciation for the subject and what it means and what it can bring and what value it has to our country if we allow it. So
awesome. Well, I'm super proud of you. I think it's so awesome what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. My question now is for Jerry. It is impossible to cover every aspect of a presidential administration, though you certainly get close. So, given your long format, how do you decide what should be included in the narrative and what actually gets cut? Not that much gets cut, but...
You would actually be surprised. Well, and I'll say that is... and. It's really episode by episode. I have to make the call. And going into the Madison presidency series, that's been one that has been lingering in my mind for a while because it is so easy for the Madison presidency series to become the War of 1812 podcast. And so I have to evaluate when I'm talking about a battle or a skirmish or whatever, what's going on in a certain place, does it really relate to the story of the presidency, or is this more of the war? Is this a larger story? And likewise, even though, and it's funny, I had a conversation with Peter Stark earlier this year about this. I include so much about events that are happening outside of the U.S., the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars. And even though folks may question, well, why is this important when you're talking about the American presidency? Because it was important to them, because it was what they were talking about, and because these things did impact presidencies and the course of the nation and how we, foreign policy was such a large part of the story from the very beginning. And so we've got to understand some things, but then again, I have to ask that question. Okay, well, how much do we really need to know about Napoleon and the Peninsular War and this British ministry? I try to tell what needs to be told in order to understand it from the lens of the American presidency, but not go down that rabbit hole. And I do have times that I do recommend folks, I'm like, here's something else that you can check out. Here's a book about this. I can't go into it. We've got to keep moving. And so it's really day by day, episode by episode, but just trying to keep that focus on the presidency and to keep the narrative moving forward. And so now I've got a question for Howard.
Ooh.
So Howard, I know that you've been focused on the early presidents for a bit, but it seems like in the last season, plotting started venturing further into presidential history. And I do have to admit, the Billy Possum episode is a particular favorite of mine, and especially Jess's reaction to Billy Possum. So, are you planning to share more stories in the later eras of presidential history moving forward? And if so, what are you doing to prepare for that?
First off, Billy Possum is a favorite of mine as well. It was so much fun crafting that episode. And I almost felt devious when I was writing it. Because I'm like, I write thinking about Jess and how she's going to react. And I'm like, I'm going to kind of play dumb through this thing about, like, why wouldn't children want a Billy Possum toy, like a stuffed possum named for William Howard Taft? I just don't get it. Why? And the whole time she's like, it's a possum! It's a possum! Why? It's disgusting! And I'm like, okay, well, let's see. Let's explore. I just felt evil. But that was a lot of fun. I do love the founding era. I love early American history. There's so many personalities there. I feel like there's so much more to dig into. And you look at a podcast like Ben Franklin's World, there's a lot to play with there that we could keep going. But you're right. I have been branching out a little bit to cover other stories that interest me. We did a little bit with Roosevelt and Taft there and the toys and how that kind of represented the times they were in. I think that's a great gateway to the times. Because it's this possum toy. It's so stupid, but it lets you see what was happening at the time, and it was a weird window into the racism of the time and Reconstruction and all these different things that, which is really interesting. And when we talked to Kara Finnegan about presidential photography, we opened that episode with a story about Jimmy Stewart and the swamp rabbit. And how there was ultimately a picture of that thing that vindicated him, but still made him seem like, why is he afraid of this rabbit? He really wasn't. He wasn't scared. He was just, telling it to go away. Really what I find myself doing, I think, is playing around the edges of the Civil War. I feel like I'm saving myself for Lincoln because I know that's a deep, fascinating hole that I may never come out of once I go down. I'll get there eventually, but I don't really see myself becoming a Civil War guy, but who knows? But yeah, I think that I'm just hesitant to dive into that because there's so much there. But I'm getting closer, and I think we're gonna cover maybe a story about Lincoln dueling this season. So we're getting there for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lincoln is one that I've got on my radar as well. I've still got a ways to go, but that temptation of just diving in and never coming out of that era.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the Carter Swamp Rabbit episode where he got teased for having run from a swamp rabbit or trying to scare one away, it swam toward him in the swamp. That happened in 1979. That was 4 years after Monty Python and the Holy Grail came out, and so I think people should have had more respect for how dangerous rabbits can be. I'm just surprised it was such a thing.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. I saw it compared to Jaws.
The public had been awakened on this peril, and
they should have. I think that was maybe still a little more fringe than the mainstream press at that point.
You mean they didn't all watch it like 100 times in their childhood, like I did?
Not like us, no.
Wow.
They went with a Jaws metaphor instead on the front page of the Washington Post. Yeah.
Great poster, by the way.
Yes.
Pause.
So I have a question for Alicia.
Hit me.
In your history program, which I just want to live vicariously through, so I appreciate you taking us on that journey. You're reading so many books for your program and for your show. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's one book that you've read that really wowed you and that you think might make the world a better place if everyone would just read it.
Yeah, read a lot for a graduate degree in history, for sure. If we're talking, but a lot of what you read, I've found, is really about your research. So there's articles and definitely there's some books. I took a historiography class my first semester, and that was a book a week basically. But so much of what you read is kind of diving into your own stuff. So I could speak so eloquently about the history of welfare and Medicaid and social work, because that's basically what my thesis is going to be on. But the first semester I took a historiography class, and the theme, so she built this book, this class around a theme of how historians have decided to write about democracy. And she definitely took a different tact, and I think it was probably in the light of a post insurrection at the White House or at the Capitol building world. And so one of the books that she had us read was Caroline Elkin's The Legacy of Violence. And it is a doorstop. It's like 600-700 pages. And it's all about the British Empire and how it has basically been a state agency of violence in order to get its political whims, its economic whims, how it's brought the United States into their kind of state-based power, state-based violence. And definitely super fascinating. I think we would understand 20th century history a scotch more if we really dove into that book. It's a tough one to get through because obviously Legacy of Violence, she doesn't play. She kind of lays it all out there. But in terms of the research that she did, I mean, she was looking at court briefs. She was looking at state memos. I mean, archival research. She did, I believe she also did oral history interviews, or she culled previous oral history interviews. And just a wonderful, wonderful approach to writing history. Now, separate and apart from that, in terms of making the world a better place.
Although that could be a what not to do.
I feel like we would be a better people if we read that book and internalized that book and maybe didn't take it so personally and really just read it for what it was.
So it's not a manual? It's not what to do?
No.
Okay.
Well, depending on who reads it. No. But in terms of making the world a better place, a book that has stayed with me, and I think I've recommended this before on another appearance, so for apologies, but Samantha Powers wrote about her time in Barack Obama's administration, and it's The Education of an Idealist, and she's an immigrant from Ireland, and a human rights person, and her story and her recollections of her time in service just is so buoyant to the soul that, in a time when we are so angry with our government and so kind of distrustful and disdainful, not that they haven't given us plenty of reasons, it's important to remember that it's more to what makes our government function than the bigwigs that we see on the television, and that there are thousands of civil servants who come to work every single day to really do the best that they can in the circumstances under which they're in. And I haven't read that book in like 5 or 6 years, but it still stays with me every time somebody asks me, like, what's a book that would make us a better people? I always want to say Samantha Powers, Education of an Idealist. So I had to add that one. And then now my turn. I have a question. So Kenny,
Woo!
You made a splash on your show, at least from this history nerd's perspective, by scoring the interview to end all interviews, which is H.W. Brands. Who is another dream guest that you'd love to have on your show?
Thank you so much. HW, it took like over a year to make those calendars align, by the way, but he was such a nice guy. I felt so privileged to get to chat with him. As far as looking forward, the interview I really want to score, as I get toward modern presidencies, I think it would be amazing to find someone who was in one of these administrations and interview them to be like, what was it actually like in the White House while this was happening, while that was happening? And one of the things that really started getting me thinking in this way is when I was getting to like Warren Harding. I was looking for authors of books about Warren Harding, and John Dean, of all people, the former White House counsel for Richard Nixon, who testified against Nixon in front of Congress, he had written a book about Warren Harding. And so I reached out to him and was like, hey, will you talk to me about Warren Harding? And he was like, hey, I'm super busy. He sent me like the friendliest email. It was like, I'm really busy, but here's this other historian, like you should talk to that guy. And it just got me thinking, there's some people who were there for these events, were alive, and are really nice people with maybe interesting things to say. So as I get closer to these recent administrations, I really look forward to trying to pursue and hopefully get some interviews with people who were there behind the scenes when things were happening to get that perspective. I think that would just be riveting. Good question.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, thanks. All right, I've got a question for Howard. Howard, one of my favorite things about your podcast, aside from the fact that it's funny and smart as hell, is that you tell some of the most fascinating and obscure stories out there. We've talked about them: Billy Possum, Jefferson's killer ram, Dolly Madison's foul-mouthed parrot, or the Wizard of Oz and William Jennings Bryan, which, by the way, I really enjoyed that one because I grew up also hearing the myth about Wizard of Oz. And so I'm just going to tell everybody, go listen to that episode to hear what I'm talking about. But how do you find and pick your stories? And also, what's the most unexpected thing, the biggest surprise you've come across so far?
Let's see. When I think about what stories to cover, I mean, there's a few criteria, kind of. Really, I just follow what interests me, and I think about Jess as a surrogate for the audience, and I think, is this something that I could tell in a way that would interest her, that would interest somebody who doesn't have a huge background in history, isn't a big history nut. So I look for the human drama, sometimes some ridiculousness if possible, but something that makes me feel something. And that can be anger sometimes about certain stories. So I look for stories like that. I sometimes get suggestions from listeners. Somebody reached out to me and they're like, hey, have you heard about Andrew Jackson and the Bell Witch? And I was like, no, what is this? And it's a local legend in Tennessee, and there's a historical marker for it. And I didn't know anything about it ahead of time, and I don't know what it really has to do with presidential history because it's all, BS, but it's fun. And some people believe it, and I started digging into it, and I became part of a Facebook group about it, and this woman reached out to me and said, I've got something that I can share with you, but not here, and do you want to call me? And I'm like, yes! And I realized, what does this really have to do with presidential history? How far have I come from, the sort of topic? But it all kind of ties in because there are some people that when they think of Andrew Jackson and his legacy, they associate it with that. So those kinds of fun stories I like to kind of dig into. When I think about unexpected stories, one or something that's been, kind of, wow, that I didn't know that. Just reading through the letters, and they're all on the Founders Archive for the founders. You can read all of the Jefferson Adams letters. It's just great. And recently I came across one that I'm sure maybe you know about this, Jerry, but Thomas Jefferson had a scrapbook, basically, of things that, like libels, things that people said about him that either he thought weren't true or were just insults. And someone found this and talked to him about it and wrote to John Adams about it. And John Adams's response was priceless. He said, I wish I knew about this. Oh, my goodness, if I had only thought to do something like this, what great, massive book could I leave to my children and grandchildren of all these things that have been said about me? And it just makes you think about how these people thought about their own legacy in their time and just a different kind of side of their personality. One other thing that was unexpected that's, less wholesome, I would say. I think about sex education back in the day and how that didn't really exist so much. And I know this wasn't intentional, and it's not really how people thought about educating their children, but it seemed like so often young people would learn about the world because their parents would, move in their cousin. Like John Quincy Adams's 3 sons, they moved in their cousin Mary Helen, who was roughly the same age, and, I mean, she ended up sleeping with all of them. One of them was engaged to her, and that engagement broke off when she ended up marrying the other brother. But, one of them ended up taking his own life, partially because of a downward spiral that may have had to do with his experience with her. Not that it's her fault, because there wasn't much to do back then. I get it.
This is a Jerry Springer episode.
It really was. But when I think about James Madison and how he met the woman that he almost married, it was at a boarding house. It's just, it's interesting to think, before the internet, before a lot of social events, I mean, they had balls and things, but school wasn't quite what it is today. You met people because they were living across the hall, and so many relationships started that way. So that was one kind of unexpected thing that I found, was just how different the world worked and how people ended up together. Those coincidences. I have a question for Jerry now. you've branched out, as you said, to cover cabinet members, vice presidents, other important figures outside of the presidency. You know, as if your plate isn't full enough. Among those that you've covered, who do you think outside of the presidency had the most influence on the country?
So I'm sorry, Kenny, but it is seriously not going to be our friend Charles Lee.
Oh, Charles Lee! But he taught us so much about procrastinating and just not doing things and falling to the top.
Just having the cup that's steaming right there on the desk. Yeah. Everybody thinks that he's in. Yes. Well, and it was interesting. And to your point, Howard, sometimes I think to myself, what have I gotten myself into that I'm taking on more in what's already a big project? But it's also, I really didn't know what to expect when I started the Seat at the Table series. And of course, you know, you've got some figures that, you know, Jefferson as Secretary of State, Madison as Secretary of State, you know, these figures who are already well known, and we realize that they do have this huge influence, but it's always interesting and just not really knowing when I start, okay, well, what is this person? What are they really doing? What is their real impact? And I think the thing that's been most surprising to me is how so many of the secretaries of the Navy are lesser known, but really should be. Like the first one, Benjamin Stoddert. Here he comes in and there's nothing. There are plans for the first 6 frigates of the U.S. Navy, but at that point it's being started under the War Department and they don't really know shipbuilding. And so in comes Stoddert. He's a merchant. He knows this business. He knows how to get things done. And he is literally building the U.S. Navy from scratch. And meanwhile, he's also entering this cabinet that everybody else is somebody that John Adams inherited from George Washington, and it's dysfunctional. It's awful. You know, these people are at times actively working against the president. And Stoddert comes in and sees this, and he starts talking to Adams, and he's like, Mr. President, do you realize what's going on behind your back? Do you realize what these folks are doing? And you start to see a shift, and you see Adams getting rid of some of these folks and starting to make a cabinet. Now, granted, he should have done it a few years before, but at least he does make a shift and starts bringing folks who really do support him. But arguably, if Stoddert hadn't come in and given him that support, I don't know if that would have happened. And so, but nobody knows about Benjamin Stoddert. Likewise, Robert Smith is basically painted based on what James Madison and Albert Gallatin have to say about Robert Smith. And Smith didn't do himself any favors at the end, but he was also a very capable Secretary of the Navy in an administration that didn't want a Navy and that did everything they could to tear down the Navy and turn it into the gunboat Navy. And then you get to the War of 1812 and you get to William Jones. Here's this guy who comes in, and granted, the previous Secretary of the Navy, Paul Hamilton, was popular, but he knew nothing about the Navy. He had no experience with merchant shipping, anything like that. And so everything was just going chaotic. And so Jones comes in and he builds what becomes what we think of as the Navy. He says, you know, why should the Secretary of the Navy, who can be just any Joe off the street, be deciding naval policy? Why don't we put together a board of naval commissioners who are people who are captains, who know about the Navy? Let's have them involved in this policymaking process. And oh, by the way, you've got me and like 2 other folks, sorting through the bills and making arrangements and sending communications. We need more than that. We need an actual structure, an infrastructure to, if we're going to make this work. And all these folks are just fascinating individuals, and they contributed so much to what we now think of as the Navy and played such a key role in American history, and nobody knows about them. They don't have, Robert Smith does have one book that I was able to find. I think it's from the 1970s, but the rest of them, nobody's written about them. They don't have a biography. If there's a thesis out there, like there was one for Jones, and that was so helpful because otherwise I was just piecing together from 20 different books. But these are folks that really should be more studied because they had a larger impact than you would think based on what little information there is out there about them. I've got a question for Kenny. So, Kenny, who is the president that you're most excited about discussing in the podcast and the ones that you've got ahead of you? I know you've covered many of them already, but you've still got some big ones to come. But then conversely, who is the president that you would have or would like to skip if you had an opportunity to say, I don't really want to cover that president?
I'll tackle these one at a time. The first one, who am I most excited about? I am both excited and daunted by LBJ.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
is such a complex person. Like, how the heck does this guy get civil rights and voting rights through Congress, the Great Society, like all these things that nobody else has done aside from Lincoln? And Lincoln didn't have an opposition party, like nobody else did the things he did. And at the same time, he's also the guy most responsible for getting us into Vietnam, and he absolutely abused the hell out of the powers of his office. It's just like, what was making this guy tick? I'm just curious what y'all think about this statement. Is he the most complex president in U.S. history? I can't think of anyone else.
I would say he's on up there.
I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. I feel validated. And then the second part of your question. So I'm really looking forward to LBJ. Oh, I'm just also going to say, I grew up in Texas, not far from where he grew up. So there's also, like, when I read his story, I see a lot of name places that I'm like, I'm tired of reading a guy's from Virginia. Thank God we got another fellow Texan here. The Pedernales River and ice cream at the end of the day. And, oh, I get it. I feel it. All right. So I'm excited about that. Now, as far as if I could or if I had to skip a president, I look forward to covering all the remaining presidents. But if I had to skip one, it would be Gerald Ford, probably. He's just kind of boring. He's the only guy who was never even elected to president or vice president, He kind of really sneaks in there in a weird way. But he does have the best jokes, all at his expense. All at his expense. One of my favorite zingers is actually one from LBJ, which is, Ford's a nice enough guy, but he's too dumb to fart and chew gum at the same time. So, yeah, I look forward to a laugh hour with Gerald Ford down the road, but I'm not sure there's not a lot else to talk about him. So it'll be a fun little episode. That gets through. Everybody has asked each other one question. This has been a lot of fun. I just thought up one more bonus question for everybody. So this is for everyone here. Bonus question. If you could have one president, alive or dead, at your family's Thanksgiving table this year, who would it be? Now, whoever's brave enough to tackle that one first.
I'll go for it. Why not?
Let's do it, Alicia.
I had 5 written, so I'm trying to make a decision here. So I guess I will go with Lincoln for many reasons. Number one, just because I'd like to, talk to him and hear his history. And I think, as is expected throughout history, his story has been shifted and reinterpreted depending on whomever is trying to argue. So I'd like to hear his memories from the horse's mouth, I guess, so to speak. And just also what a kind of fascinating up by your bootstrap type of guy. So I think I would do Lincoln.
I like it. All right, Jerry, Howard, either of y'all got one?
I think Lincoln's a great answer, but I can't give the same answer, so...
It's a peril of not going first, yeah.
I mean, I'm a nut for the Addams family. I love John Quincy Adams, but I think he, in some ways, was maybe just a little too curmudgeon-y. Curmudgeon-y. Too much of a curmudgeon. Yeah. I think curmudgeon-y should be a word. But it's so close to curmudgeon-ly that you're like, did you misspeak? And I'm like, no, I was trying to be weird. But I think John Adams himself would probably be a better guest because I think he just had maybe a better sense of humor. I mean, obviously, with any early president, it would be weird. You know, they'd be asking, what's that? What's that? You know, how does this work? And it's like, shut up and let's just eat. But I think John Adams would be just a real pleasure to meet because he's so... he's got this wit, he's got this warmth for his friends, and he kind of has this hatred for a whole lot of other people, and I think that makes for a fun conversation.
Nice. Jared, you got one. I'll go last.
So it depends on how you feel about your family. So if you if you didn't like your family, you know, inviting Andrew Jackson or LBJ and then just letting them go and just sit back and watch, that could be interesting. Luckily, I do like my family, so I won't be inviting them this year. Honestly, I would say Jimmy Carter, just because he is a figure that has fascinated me for a long time. And Kenny, it's interesting, you know, as somebody from the South and knowing that he was a Southern president in the more recent era, I would just love to hear him talk about his life and just tell tales about what, and especially like having read some of his works, I know that it would be a great conversation, and just to hear from him, I think that would make for a really great dinner conversation.
These are all great answers. I think I'm going to go with Theodore Roosevelt because he is just going to so bogart all the conversation that there will be no room for awkward conversations around the dinner table. We're just going to have to listen to him for like 8 hours, and it's going to be great. So I think he's who I'd invite. Well, despite that, I'm glad that you guys were at my Friendsgiving dinner table right here today. This was a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed this. Can't wait to do it again next year. This was Kenny Ryan. Everybody sign off for me.
Jerry Landry signing off. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. And thank you so much to each of you for your friendship and for being an inspiration to myself as well as other fellow podcasters. Alicia, I'll hand it to you.
Oh gosh, of course you're going to hand it to me after those beautiful words. Thanks for having me. No, you know, you three have been the light of my life ever since I started podcasting. So I appreciate this. I love that, Kenny, you thought of this, and I hope to do this for many more years. So this is Alicia signing off. Go, Howard.
Yes, this was a pleasure. You folks are an inspiration to me. What you do, the dedication, the output. It's inspiring and makes me feel bad at the same time. But I just love hanging out and talking history with you guys. And yeah, it was just a great time. And I look forward to where all of your episodes go from here. And it really is it speaks to the podcasting community, especially the history podcasting community, the support that there is for each other and the interest. And it's one of the things I found that I'm surprised about, how supportive and great that community is. And the three of you just really epitomize that.
Thank you all so much. Such kind words. Great to talk to all of you. Have a great Thanksgiving, listeners. I look forward to seeing what all of my fellow podcasters, what you all come out with over the next year. Take care. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Abridged Presidential Histories. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, tell your friends and family about the show, and write a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I also encourage you to check out Jerry, Howard, and Alicia's podcasts, Presidencies of the United States, Plotting Through the Presidents, and Civics and Coffee. If you'd like to support this show, you can look it up on Patreon or go directly to www.patreon.com/abridgedpresidentialhistories. This helps me buy books and pay to host the show, and thank you to everyone who's contributed so far. The music in today's podcast is a public domain recording of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. In our next episode, it's time for JFK. How does a sickly womanizer and war hero become president? Well, it helps when daddy has money. From World War II to the Cuban Missile Crisis, we'll peel back the myth and find out who was John F. Kennedy. That's coming up next on Abridged Presidential Histories.